Good afternoon, everyone. I'm goLocal Live contributor Chelsea Gay here in our downtown Providence studio, ready to talk about current events and everything that's happening in Rhode Island and beyond. And our first guest today, we have Elizabeth Heaton from Bright Horizons College Coach. She is the vice president and a former college admissions officer as well. And in the wake of last week's Operation Varsity Blues, we want to get an update on everything that's going on in that space. We had dozens conspiring to get their kids into universities, 50 people involved. It's a huge story. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us fresh off your Good Morning America interview. We appreciate you taking the time to talk to us as well.
Absolutely. I love Providence, and I'd love to be on the show, so thanks for having me.
Excellent. So if you can give our viewers just sort of a quick overview, have there been any new developments over the past week? I know it's easy to kind of lose track with everything that's coming out, but in terms of your world, the college enrollment admissions world, what has conspired over this past week in this scandal?
Yeah, well, basically the biggest thing to hit this space in some time, I actually can't think of something this big, this newsworthy, or that at least has been covered this much in the news in the 17 years that I've been working in this space. Basically what has happened is, some people were arrested. I mean, Felicity Huffman was arrested with guns drawn over some work that they were doing, they were paying someone to do, where they were essentially lying, bribing, cheating, and breaking the law to get their kids in to the schools that they had decided they really needed to go to, or to get them the test scores that they decided their kids weren't capable of getting on their own, to get them into the schools they really thought their kids should go to. There's so much wrong with this that it almost makes my head explode. I think what has been probably for me just the most shocking part of this was just the lengths that people went to and just the sheer audacity of just not even really, I know this is probably not right, but we're going to do it anyway. It's been a little mind-boggling.
And so, you're very familiar with the process of admissions and also working with Bright Horizons College Coach. Is the process as it stands now effective because something like this happened, or is it broken at this point?
Yeah, I really don't think it's broken. When I was an admissions officer, I worked at the University of Pennsylvania, so definitely at one of those very selective schools that people do tend to really want to go to. Yep. I took my role as an admissions officer very seriously. I knew that I had people's lives in my hands when I was reading a file, and I know that all of my colleagues did. And even though I'm no longer in admissions reading those files and making admit decisions, I still do know people in that world, and all of my former colleagues are all doing work similar to what I do, whether they're doing that in a school setting or doing it the way that I do it. And the commonality with all of us is just that this is really important work, and it's notable that no one in admissions was implicated in this. This was all sort of perpetrated on the admissions offices and not by the admissions offices. And the other really important thing to note here is that we are talking about the tiniest percentage of colleges
Absolutely.
Here in this country, right? And we're also talking about 33 families who did this. Mm-hmm. So is it still really, really, really difficult to get into these highly selective schools? Of course it is, but the process as it is designed does still yield a really interesting class at all of these schools every year. And then there are 80% of the colleges in this country who are accepting more than 50% of their applicants. So they are welcoming far more students to their campuses than they are turning away.
Absolutely.
So I think so long as you're not trying to subvert the process does actually still work.
Okay. And so, it is these sort of, as you said, more tougher to get into schools, Yale, Stanford, USC, that are wrapped up in this. But what do you think they need to be doing as a former admissions officer? What do you think those schools need to be doing in this situation in terms of, I know that they're not directly involved as admissions, but how does the school need to respond in a situation like this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was also an athletics liaison when I was at Penn, so I do have some insight into kind of the recruiting process, a little bit about how that works, mostly from the perspective of as admissions admitting recruited athletes. And I do think what they have likely recognized is that if they thought they had checks and balances there, clearly they didn't have enough checks and balances. Yeah. And so it would be nice to see some more of those. And actually, as I have freely admitted in other conversations that I've had, I wasn't necessarily privy to what might have happened to athletes when they came to campus. So I was part of the process of them being admitted. But once they were on our campus, there may have been oversight that where my dean was paying attention to who was on the who made the teams, who played, but I wasn't necessarily aware of that if it was happening. That doesn't mean it wasn't happening. The other thing that's interesting is that at this level of school, oftentimes the carrot or the bonus for the athlete is you're getting in. You're not necessarily getting a scholarship. You're only, especially at the Ivies, you're just getting a financial aid award if you qualify. Absolutely. That means that that money that helps you afford that school is not tied to you playing on the team. So you could come to campus and say, I know I got here because the coach put in a word for me with admissions, but I've decided I don't really want to play the sport anymore, and then not play.
Got it.
But I think, they would need to be looking for trends. So my hope is that we will see that. The other thing that's really interesting is that there was an article that came out in Higher Ed magazine where they talked to a bunch of different deans about, what they were going to do differently now. And there were a lot of evasions, maybe that's a strong word, but I didn't see a lot of people that really answered the question very directly. But interestingly enough, my alma mater, they have a new dean. It's not the dean I worked under when I was at Penn, but he said he had an idea, which I thought was very interesting, which was that what they might start to do would be to verify the way they do with the FAFSA. So what happens with the FAFSA is, they pull random selection of students and they verify the information. And I think that would be an interesting approach to there's no way to verify that every piece of information you get into an admissions office is real and true and accurate. But you could pull a certain percentage of the applicant pool randomly every year and then spot check those and dig deeper. And that might kind of curb any sort of tendency people might have to lie or exaggerate in their applications.
Of course. So it's something. I mean, there has to be something that's done. And even if it's a small idea, it's gotta help in this situation. And
right.
Now in terms of the students involved, there's been a lot of back and forth debate on, what should happen. A lot of people are saying they should lose their spot at the college. Do you have an opinion on kind of what you think should happen to those students that are wrapped up in this situation?
Sure. Certainly any student who is in the applicant pool right now who was able to be linked to this, I think should not be admitted.
And I think they have taken that away at this point.
Yeah, well, certainly I know that USC has publicly said, I think there were 6 students in the applicant pool, they pulled them. And my guess is that every other school out there is combing their applicants to make sure that they're not about to admit one of these kids connected to the scandal. Mm-hmm. The bigger challenge is that we've seen and heard from some of these stories. There was the student who met with an advisor as he was a freshman, and the advisor in the course of the meeting asked him how he was going to balance track with his studies, or, did he have any strategies? And the student said, well, I don't run track. What are you even talking about, right? So
great.
Yeah, exactly. So in that situation, you have a student who is at this school who has no idea that he's there because his parents have falsified information. They did show that for some of these students, the cheating on the standardized test happened after they took it. Yeah. They took it and thought they did well. So that's really tricky. If you have this student, they're enrolled in your campus, they're doing well, do you punish them for something their parents did, or do you allow them to continue out and hope that you're teaching them better ethics? Yeah. It is very tricky.
Yeah, and then there's the point of people that, this went back to 2011. What about those people that have already graduated, that have degrees and licenses and benefited from this? Are you going to take those degrees away? I mean, it gets really tricky at that point. I was hoping you had the answer.
Yeah, I mean, you can take those degrees away. I do think that's really important for our listeners, too. And one of the things that can happen, I was reading an article that said, oddly enough, something like this, when it happens, will sometimes have more people cheating because they say, well, everyone's doing it, so I'm going to do it too. Yeah. But I do think it's important for people to recognize two really important consequences here. The first is that if at any point a school finds that you falsified your information on your application, or you're cheating while you're in college, they can revoke your degree. They can do that 15, 20 years after you have graduated. Almost, schools have this language in their materials, so that's something to be aware of. So in answer to your question, yeah, you could be out there functioning, doing work that you need a degree for, and they could take that degree away from you.
Wow.
And then I think the other thing is that as a parent, what you're really saying is to your child, not that, yes, you're saying it's okay to cheat, which in and of itself I think we could probably all agree is not ideal.
Yeah.
What you're also really saying to your child, and I have a 14-year-old son, and so I'm really always cognizant of what am I really saying when I do some things, is that you're not capable. You're not good enough. Your best is not good enough for me. And therefore, I'm going to have to find someone who can be better than you because you can't do it. And I just, what a terrible message to send to my child.
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of articles that have come out as a separation from that about the suicide rates in these areas where these kids are, we don't want to go ahead and say we feel terrible for these kids that grew up with this wealthy lifestyle, but you're absolutely right when a parent is saying, I don't really trust you to handle this yourself, I'm going to have someone else do it or pay someone off. I mean, it's really a blow to the ego of the child involved at that point. So
right, ego and confidence and belief in themselves, right? Probably most importantly, if not everyone has kids, but if you're thinking about if your parent had done this to you, how would you feel? I mean, some of these kids are hard to feel sorry for. I might single out Lori Loughlin's daughter.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they're getting a lot of press right now, of course.
It's a little tough to feel badly for her. But at the core of all of this is really still people are people, and how just completely devastating it would be to have your name, to know, for everyone around you to know that your parents had to do this so you could go to this school. That can't feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on a more upbeat note, after all this discussion, I want to talk quickly about Bright Horizons College Coach, because you guys are doing some pretty awesome things helping students and families with the college enrollment process in general. So on the positive side, there are a lot of students that are going to apply to college right about now, thinking about where they want to be going to school. What are some things they can do to enhance their, ability to get into these schools, whether they're at the high level like this or, they're going to a state school, et cetera?
Right. I think first and foremost is to recognize that there are more than 3,000 four-year institutions in this country, which means there are a lot of places where you could go and be happy. A lot of options. We don't just have this tiny little subsection, and there's one right in the middle of Providence, but there are a lot of great options right in Rhode Island at a variety of different levels of selectivity. I think my biggest advice is to be authentic and to be, just self-aware, and to approach this process more from the perspective of what am I looking for in my college? What do I want to study? If I don't know what I want to study, then I guess I better look for schools with a lot of different options so that I can change my mind or have my choice of different majors, and be true to yourself. So when you are presenting yourself in your application, don't try to be someone you are not. How can the college determine if you're really the best fit if you are pretending to be someone different? And that inauthenticity does tend to come out in an application where there's something about it that doesn't feel quite right or doesn't feel that compelling. It's often because a student is writing what they think an admissions office wants to hear, or they're trying to be a different student rather than just putting their best self forward in their application. Have a list that's balanced. It's fine to reach and have a couple of schools that maybe you're not sure you're going to get into. But then you want to have some schools where you look a lot like the average accepted applicant. And then you want a couple of schools where you look maybe stronger than the average accepted applicant. So you don't need to be applying to 20 schools. We recommend a range of somewhere between 7 and 9. And I would say that most of the students that I work with, my colleagues work with, maybe apply to maybe as many as 12. And we really do try to pull it back from that. I think those are some of the ways to approach this process, and really from the perspective of how can I make them like me, but do I like them? And hey, this is me. And then I think that results in a much better process and result, and where you get in the end.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for all of your insight. Elizabeth Heaton from Bright Horizons and College Coach. We thank you for coming on. We know you love Providence, so we appreciate that, and we hope to stay in touch with you as this develops to kind of see what's happening next, if there's any policy changes. So we appreciate you weighing in on this, and we are going to link to the website for Bright Horizons College Coach in our write-ups so that people can check that out if they're applying this year. It's a great resource for that. So again, thank you for joining us. Guys, we'll be right back in just a couple minutes with our second guest. Thank you.
Thanks.